Welcome to 2 Cents Sharp.
We're a couple of trumpet players who sort through the best and worst of the online trumpet community, so you don't have to.
Then we give our 2 cents.
Today we're going to be reading from an old thread in the Trumpet Herald Lounge forum, where user Wilcox96 posted, "I'd be interested in any funny stories that happened while doing a musical. Local theater, Broadway, whatever. It could involve you, or just be a story about someone else."
The first response is from Trumpet Mike, who replied, "The discovery that the local pizza place would deliver to the pit. The lower stage door opened almost directly into the pit, meaning that we could order before we started the opening number, and it would arrive midway through the first half. All was fine until we realized midway through the week that we hadn't actually been tidying up the boxes, just stacking them in the corner. By the end of the week, the smell was truly amazing. Maybe we shouldn't have ordered extra garlic bread every evening."
The smell of old pizza boxes was probably still an improvement. Some pits can really smell, well, like pits.
Unless the smells combined.
Well, user Trumpet for Hire replied, "We just finished Crazy for You this last weekend at the high school I teach at. During a dress rehearsal, I started to smell something kind of good. The brass section had brought in some brats and were cooking them on their stand lights. They would wrap them in foil, and in about 20 minutes they were ready to eat. They ended up feeding all 26 members of the pit. They even made one for me. Such thoughtful kids."
Oz Trumpeteer replied, "I think I've posted this before, but anyway. During a local musical production, one of the actors bumped a chair off the stage and into the pit. It landed on the fourth chair trumpeter's head. Luckily for me, I was on third. During a matinee of the same show, an actor was supposed to reach into a pond, the pit, and fish something out. A shoe, I think. Usually it was supposed to be surreptitiously handed to her by the drummer, but instead this time he decided to dress up like a diver, complete with snorkel and flippers, and climbed up onto the stage, handed the shoe over, and then jumped back into the pit. Of course, only the pit orchestra knew this was going to happen. One more. My teacher told me about a prank he pulled on a friend, a sax player, who had a solo with a page turn in his music right before the solo. So, before the show, he put a crazy picture in the music after the page turn. Needless to say, the sax player missed his entrance."
Ralph NZ responds to this saying, "I did this to a pianist who boasted about doing it to someone else. Stuck a crazy picture on his most important solo piece. The whole pit cracked up, and the cast was puzzled. But I'm sure we could fill another thread with just pranks. What else happened? A walking stick fell on a viola player. Perfection. All the stand lights went out during the Swan Lake finale. A pianist accidentally dropped a bar and the rest of the band followed him. This would have been fine if the entire cast wasn't tap dancing at the time. During the same show, we spent the tacit numbers watching a tuner. Oh, and in Madame Butterfly, when the first trumpet plays the start of the American National Anthem, pretty obvious when he totally missed the 6th note."
Bum, ba, bum, 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 ba. Wilcox96 gave his own contribution. "I started making signs the second week on a tour of the producers. Man, what a funny show with a ton of great lines. I held them up at the bows, but had to be quick because the exit music came quickly. Had the cast dying, and they couldn't wait until the next night to see what I'd come up with. Another is, we had 3 trumpets in front of the percussionist. To separate us, there was a large plexiglass shield. One night, during a very quiet moment right before we had an entrance, we heard this tiny, high-pitched squeaka, squeaka. We heard it again. Squeaka, squeaka, squeaka. I turned to the guy sitting next to me, and his face was red as a beet with a big grin. It was his chair up against the plexiglass shield, and here we had to come in seconds. You know, you wonder why some things get to you, but this one did. All 3 of us were quivering, tears down our faces, barely able to make the entrance. Each breath was a guffaw. The conductor was looking at us and thankfully was grinning too. I thought we'd never recover."
I've had the same thing happen to me, except usually it's a stomach growl. Well, Derek Reben commented, Every year, the Phoenix Symphony would draw straws to see who would cover the local performance of the Nutcracker. It seemed like every year my instructor ended up with the Nutcracker. I think it was 26 performances every December. There's a section in the ballet where the Nutcracker falls apart on the stage, and the conductor's direction to the members in the pit was to create some chaos when this happened. The brass players would have a bunch of old aluminum cans in a bag and drop them at the appropriate time. Well, many of the performances were at Gamage Auditorium. There's a very long concrete tunnel that leads to the pit, and there's a steel staircase from the tunnel to the pit level. Apparently, at one matinee performance, just after all the brass players had dropped their bags, the timpani player, in a surprise move, threw a steel garbage can down the stairs into the concrete tunnel. This caused more chaos than anyone had expected, as the can continued to bounce and crash seemingly forever into this tunnel. All the brass players were laughing so hard that they literally were out of commission, and they missed their next entrance. I wish I'd been there for that one.
User R. Gale commented, "Sometimes players try to crack each other up in a pit orchestra. There was a rowdy trombonist, and he was wearing lederhosen in the pit. When it came time for the trumpeter to have a solo, he could see the trombonist clearly. The trombonist, during the solo, slowly unbuttoned his lederhosen, slowly pulled out a large kielbasa sausage which he'd put in there, cut off a large piece with his knife, and proceeded to eat it. The trumpet player managed to keep going, but only with great effort. Of course it was the trombone player."
User Bill Scott commented, "I'll never forget the Christmas concert last year. The guy that was playing in the section with me had bought this Jupiter trumpet with a removable bell. He could either have a straight bell or a dizzy bell. So, we're cooking along, and the night is going fine until a number about halfway through. The piece called for mutes about 5 lines into the number, and we had to grab them quick. This guy grabbed his, went to stuff the mute into the bell, and the whole horn just flew apart. The mute, the bell, and the body of the horn were going in 3 different directions as he was frantically trying to catch them. I grabbed the bell, the baritone player wound up with the mute, and we both just busted up laughing. So much for the rest of that piece."
User Never Enough replied with several different stories. "I haven't gotten to see too many actual pranks, but there have been a few funny accidents over the years. One year in high school, the orchestra was playing Bugler's Holiday, where I was on the third part. At the second performance, we were in this awful auditorium where the echoes were so bad that it made the first and second parts miss one of their entrances. And now, I'm not sure whether I could have come in and saved it, but I know I sure wasn't going to. After about 2 bars, half of the orchestra had stopped playing, and eventually there were just echoes going about the room. It was then that the first trumpet just picked up randomly a few lines down, and everyone came back in. People in the audience said they never noticed the mistake."
Another year at jazz competition, I had a solo, and on my way back to the risers, I slipped and almost took out half the section as well as a few stands. That was bad enough, but then listening to the judges' tapes, I heard them comment that you should try not to fall down after the solo.
Another orchestra story. We had this one really long song where there were several very long rests, and at one point there was a tuba entrance, which basically everyone counted on to come in. Well, come concert time, the tuba player missed their entrance, and the whole orchestra stopped playing for a measure, and then came in once the tuba player played the entrance. The director never noticed.
A fun time we had in jazz rehearsal once happened when we had to go through all the programs for the upcoming championships. The front page had the wrong quotation on it, from like some other year, so we were spending a part of the rehearsal tearing out sheets of paper. Well, once we had actually got started playing, papers started to fly. Everyone was throwing them all over, and for the rest of rehearsal, we were stockpiling and throwing papers during every rest.
User Johnson comments, "This one always struck me as a possible urban myth, but it's funny anyway. I heard it happened at an opera production at CCM several years ago, so maybe someone can confirm. The pit orchestra was on one of those rising pit platforms with the hydraulic lift to bring them up to the audience level for bows. A double bass player was near the edge of the platform and holding their bass upright. As the platform started rising for orchestra bows, the double bass scroll got caught on the lip, the bottom, of the stage above, and the pin was caught on the platform below. The bass player struggled to unwedge the bass, but without success, resulting in a crumpled bass and what I assume was a very loud noise.
Finally, user Trumpet Tooth responds to this. This reminds me of a story I heard from a musician who used to play in live variety shows, back when typical TV shows weren't pre-recorded. I think it's an urban legend. Apparently, the band was on a riser just a few inches in front of a plywood backdrop. With the whole band on it, you obviously couldn't move the riser forward without disassembling the whole set. A musician somehow fell into the gap between the riser and the set and became stuck in there, where he stayed until the show ended some 40 minutes later. I suppose he wasn't injured, so they decided not to interrupt the broadcast.
I've gotta say, that might have been embarrassing, but it was probably the easiest pay that guy had ever gotten.
Not like trumpets don't already get paid to sit quietly and do nothing for long periods of time.
Now we're going to change gears and switch over to something we call the Emerging Leaders Spotlight.
This is a segment where we feature trumpet players in the dawn of their careers who are not only talented musicians, but a force for good in the trumpet community.
This segment is inspired by the late Ryan Anthony, who championed the idea that as musicians, we should also be positive and welcoming people. The musicians we feature are leaders in this initiative, and we are excited to see what they will continue to do for the music and trumpet communities in the future.
Our first emerging leader is David "Cookie" Cook. David Cook is an orchestral trumpeter, content creator, and an avid brass bander. He is a member of the Saginaw Bay Symphony Orchestra, the Flint Symphony Orchestra, Five Lakes Silver Band, and Five Speed Brass Quintet. In addition to his playing duties, he regularly makes videos in his home studio. He is a co-founder and co-director of the Trumpeters Multi-Track Competition and is an artist in association with Brookwright Music promoting their publications. David is proudly sponsored by Van Laar Trumpets and Flugelhorns, Venture Mouthpieces, and Barkley Microphones.
My brother played trumpet when I was growing up, so that was obviously a huge influence on me. My mom played euphonium in the church brass group, so when I was a really little kid, there was lots of brass music happening. When it came time to start beginning band, though, I didn't want to play a brass instrument. I want to play drums. I want to play percussion. That went over like a lead balloon. And then I really wanted to play the flute. And my parents didn't say, no, you can't play the flute. They said, hey, we have a trumpet, because your brother played. And so I picked up the trumpet on the condition that if I really didn't like it, I could play flute. Yeah, so I started beginning band in 5th grade, and I was actually just going through my files recently, and I found my practice card from the first year. You had to practice 20 minutes a week. I had 1 week that was like 3 hours for 5th grade. That's kind of impressive. So yeah, I quickly knew this was going to be my thing. My favorite part of the trumpet community. My favorite part is the people, but specifically like getting to know the people that are behind all of the stuff that we do. Like, getting to know the people that make our horns and our mouthpieces and, cameras and stuff. It's really cool. Not only are we ambassadors to the arts, we're ambassadors to the general public, really. We are very visible to the public, that it's our duty to be good stewards. If we want classical music to continue thriving, we have to change gears and open it up so that audiences will be more engaged of all ages. I would hope that stuff that I do sort of helps influence and get people involved in music in the future. While we were in school, I'd be like, hey, let's practice together. And it was a very much like a trading off, not like, hey, I'm better than you, I want to show you this. There were a couple times when it'd be like, hey, why don't you try it this way or try this? But for the most part, it was just like, well, I would hope that by being around me, that you could get something out of that, and not like in an egotistical way. Be like, hey, this is one way I can help you out. And it also helps me out because, you know, when you're practicing with somebody, you automatically get breaks in there. And, you know, you're not just learning from me, I'm learning from you.
That's all for this week. Many thanks to David Koch for joining us to talk about trumpet for a while. The full interview will be available in a future episode, so make sure to like, follow, subscribe, etc. to hear all the great things he had to say.
All the music in this episode was recorded and produced by David Koch. The intro music is He Came to Give Us Life, composed by John Larson and arranged by Jonathan Meade. The emerging artist music is Someone to Watch Over Me, composed by George and Ira Gershwin, arranged by Joseph Turin, and reorchestrated by David Koch. The ending music is Fantasia on Jesus Loves Me, originally composed by Anna Bartlett Warner and William Batchelder Bradbury, and arranged by Marcus Grant.
To keep up with David on his musical journey, you can follow him on Instagram or Twitter at TrumpetKing93. His Facebook page is Cookies Music and can be found at facebook.com/DAVIDKOCH music. His Patreon is patreon.com/cookiesmusic, and his website is www.cookiesmusic.com. You can also subscribe to his channel on YouTube, where he posts plenty of content.
Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you next time. And remember, always play 2 cents sharp.